Well, good morning, friends. How we doing today? Good. So blessed to be with you guys today. So blessed to be able to share. I know my wife and I were so blessed by what Pastor Manny and Shelley had to say already. And so I want to start it off in the same place that he did. I just want to look at Hebrews chapter 10, verse 23, which says, "Let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for he," obviously speaking of the Lord, "he is faithful." How true that is, right? The God you and I serve is so faithful. He's faithful in our marriages. My wife and I last month just celebrated 24 years being married together. And
Thank you.
There were a lot of times in those 24 years that we thought, if the Lord isn't going to be faithful, this is not going to keep lasting. And she's amazing. I'm not. And so it was so great for the Lord just to see his faithfulness. We met 25 years ago at Calvary Chapel Vista down in the north part of San Diego. And I was the assistant to the youth pastor, and she was an assistant to one of the teachers that was attached to our school that was at the church at that time. And it was summertime, and I was fixing desks in the classroom. And the teacher that she worked with said to me, "Have you ever noticed my aide?" She was trying to play matchmaker. And I said, like pretending like I had no idea who she was. I absolutely knew who she was. She was the cute aide. So I knew exactly who her aide was, but I was like, well, and trying to be so spiritual about it. And she said, well, she's amazing. She loves Jesus. She's actually gone right now speaking at a women's retreat. And I was like, what? That's amazing. That's what I want to do. Not speak at women's retreats, but like, I want a wife who speaks at women's retreats.
So Mercedes, Shelley, if you guys are looking for a speaker.
Yes, apparently. Yes. I have spoken at one women's retreat. It was yours. So I came back and
I invited him once.
She helped me fulfill my lifelong dream, I guess, to speak at a women's ministry event. But anyway, so it was amazing, and I was such a loser trying to get her attention. I realized that this probably wasn't going to sell it to her, so I need to get her in a ministry environment so she could see like when God took a hold of me, because I felt that was more attractive than what my mama and daddy gave me. So I'll take the Lord's hand any day, and so I would try to invite her, like, hey, do you want to come, help us with the youth ministry? And you want to go, we're taking the kids ice skating. You want to come with us? And it was all just a ploy. And she was serving another church in town. And so she would say, no. And I had almost given up. And I just said, I'm going to throw the Hail Mary pass here. I said, do you want to go to lunch with me? And she said, yes. And I was like, wow, that was a lot easier than I thought it would have been. I mean, it had been weeks of me trying to strategize. How can I get her to see God's calling on my life? But it was amazing. So she said yes, and we got married not too long after that, and it was just so great. So we did youth ministry together at Calvary Vista, again, Calvary in North County, San Diego. And then when we were in our mid-20s, we moved out to Paris, Texas, which is this little town about 2.5 hours northeast of Dallas, about 30 minutes from Oklahoma and 45 minutes from Arkansas, so right there in the corner. And we pastored out there for almost 7 years, and then felt a call to come back to Calvary Vista. And we were I was an assistant pastor at Calvary Vista, and then God opened up the door. This one lady we knew at a place called the Garden Fellowship, which, it's in India, so it's kind of like, why would you ever call it the Garden? Well, the church started long before I got there. It started in a nursery. So, it was kind of built with a little outside amphitheater where they could sit, which I thought was the worst idea ever, because it's 125 today out there. So outside services don't sound fun to me when it's 80, let alone when it's 125. So they may do, but by the time I got there, they had a building. So praise the Lord. And their pastor, fell. And so I heard this one lady was going through a hard time just with that. And God just started burdening both of our hearts for that church out there. And so 9 years ago, we moved out and took over that church. And just to watch God grow it from, about 400 people when we started to where it is today is just an amazing thing to watch God do an amazing work out there, even in the desert. God has not forsaken the desert. So it's an amazing place. And again, as I said, we're just so thankful to be here with you today. But speaking about that theme verse that Pastor Manny taught on and that I just read, God is so faithful, and he's so faithful when it comes to our marriages. And I was thinking about what God kind of put on our hearts to do here. And I just want to take a second to look at a couple in the Bible, and that's Abraham and Sarah. If you go one page to the right there and go from Hebrews 10 to Hebrews 11, in verse 8 of Hebrews chapter 11, it starts to talk about Abraham. And it says this about Abraham, Hebrews 11, verse 8. It says, "By faith Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to the place he would receive as an inheritance. And he went out, not knowing where he was going. By faith he dwelt in the land of promise, as in a foreign country, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs of him of the same promise. For he waited for the city which has foundations, whose builder and maker is God." And then it starts to talk about his wife. "By faith Sarah also received strength to conceive seed, and she bore a child when she was past age, because she judged him, the Lord, faithful who had promised. Therefore from one man, him as good as dead, were born as many as the stars of the sky in multitude, innumerable as the sand which is by the seashore. And these all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, were assured of them and embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on earth. For those that say such things declare plainly that they seek a homeland. And if they had called to mind the country in which they had come out, they would have an opportunity to return. But now they desire a better, that is a heavenly country. Therefore God is not ashamed to call them their God, for he has prepared a city for them." Just a couple of more. Verse 17, "By faith Abraham," back to him, "when he was tested, he offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said, 'In Isaac your seed shall be called,' concluding that God was able to raise him up, even from the dead, from which he also received him," in a figurative sense. God, as we take just a few minutes to consider your word, God, I pray for every couple here, whether they're married, whether they're engaged, whether they're dating, courting, whatever their relationship status is, God, I know the cry of all of our hearts is we want you to be the center of these relationships. We want you to show us how to be husbands or future husbands, how to be wives, future wives. We need your gifting, your calling, your anointing, because marriage can be, if done right, a slice of heaven. And yet if we take the reins, it can be as close to hell as hopefully we'll ever get. So God, I pray that we would listen to your word today, be encouraged by your truth, and to be the husbands and wives, be the men and women that you're calling us to be. And we pray that together. In Jesus' name, amen. Most of you know, I know you're a well-taught congregation, that Hebrews 11 is a great group of men and women who walked with God by faith. But the only couple in this chapter is Abraham and Sarah, because they really walked by faith together. They trusted God for most of their life. We'll get into their follies a little bit today too, but they trusted God together. And as we look at this couple, my wife is going to bring up things about Sarah that I think not just, obviously you ladies can learn from, but I'll be honest, I don't know if it's very Calvary Chapel-like, but you men will learn some things too. And then I'll circle back to Abraham and some things we can learn from him as well. And so the first thing we want to talk about is, as we just see this couple, and most of us are familiar with their story, we see first of all, something good they did walking by faith together is they didn't cling to their past. And how do you see that from Sarah's perspective, sweet girl?
Well, I love that our theme verse today is God, through the author of Hebrews, telling us what to hold fast to. Because I feel like, especially as women, we kind of tend to be the ones who hold all things together. You know, we're trying to hold the family together. We're trying to hold the house together. And yet, if we cling too tight, that's when we find ourselves stressed out and overwhelmed and spinning plates. And so we're going to hold fast to something in life. And yet God tells us what to hold fast to, that we're not to hold fast to anything except for him, that we're to hold fast to the promises that he has given us. And the first thing I want to say about Sarah is that she could walk by faith because she did not hold fast to her past. She had a light grip on her past, a light grip on her life. You know, they were from Ur, and I don't know if you're going to get into it, but, you know, it was a great big city, and here God tells them to leave and doesn't even give them a place to go to. And so she didn't hang on to who she was. Her identity was not in where she lived or what her house looked like or what her family looked like. She was willing to trust God for the future. And Solomon in Ecclesiastes, he says, don't say, why were the old days better? And I don't know about you, but I think as a mom, as a wife, that's kind of sometimes our tendency. We loved it, you know, when our kids were this age, or maybe for some of you before you had kids, or, you know, whatever it might be. And we kind of tend to look at the past and say, oh, those days were better. And yet Sarah could be a woman of faith because she didn't cling to her past. She didn't hold fast to her past. And she didn't hold fast to her identity, her prominence, her reputation, her wealth. In Proverbs 23:5, it says, in the blink of an eye, wealth disappears. It sprouts wings and flies away. And I think all of us are kind of living that right now. Like, wait, where did all that money go that we felt like we had a few years ago? And yet Sarah was a woman of faith because she was willing to leave it all behind for a pilgrim lifestyle. She was willing to trust God that her treasure would be found in heaven. And, you know, I think Sarah really serves as an example for us wives in how to do that, because I think that there are plenty of Abrahams that are called by God to live a life of faith, and yet their wives simply will not go. That there are men who are called by God to be faithful, to follow, to go out, to start new works, to do new things. And there are many women who refuse to be Sarahs and just won't do it. Whether it's a feeling of permanence that they long for, or a feeling of stability that they long for, or they just don't want to give up their comfortable lifestyle. Whatever it is, there are so many times where maybe you and many women out there have a difficult time being a Sarah. And I remember a couple we knew ages and ages ago, and it was clear that God had placed a call on their lives for them to be missionaries. And God was doing something. He was stirring their heart. They went to the country. They felt called to the people. And yet when they got home, the guy, his wife said to me, I know we're called to go, but not yet. You know, their kids were teenagers. They wanted to just kind of finish raising them a little bit. Her parents were old. She wanted to take care of them. And so they didn't go. And it's the most heartbreaking thing, because actually he went. He knew he was called by God to go. And so he kind of tried to live in that country for half of the time and in America for half of the time. And honestly, I look at them and their lives are a mess right now. The kids that they stayed for hardly speak to them. They've been in and out of jail. They're married to the wrong people, divorced. They got pregnant before they were married. And she can rightly say, he cheated. He left me in America. He went to another country. We didn't stay together. And she's right. And they're divorced also, by the way, and both remarried. But an outside perspective sees that their family was going in a specific direction, but the second that he had a calling, that they had a calling, and she said, no, I won't do it. We've got to stay for the kids. We've got to stay for my parents. We've got to stay. That their lives were torn apart. Her husband had a call, and she said, no, not now, not yet, or I won't, and maybe someday. And I think what I learned from them and what we can learn from Sarah is that what we think will be solid ground will always be sinking sand if we're not in the will of God. That what we think will be a difficult place will actually be the safest place if it's what God has for us. I mean, I look at their kids, their teenage kids that they stayed for, and I just think, well, what if God was trying to take them away from their friends in order to keep them out of jail, in order to keep them from pregnancy, in order to keep them from divorce? What if God was trying to wrap you up in a little missionary bubble to save your family, and yet basically they treated God as though he did not know best, and that they knew best, and they stayed, and everything that they feared came upon them? And I think what's important for us to remember is that, yeah, Abraham and Sarah, they lived by faith. They left Ur, and God blessed them. But what's important to remember is that had they stayed in Ur, their life would not have been the same. You know, we like to think of the options as life can either stay exactly how it is right now, or we can follow God. But that's never the case. Whether God is trying to do a new thing, a good thing, or save us from something, God's will and God's ways are always best. And, you know, I think Sarah chose God. She chose to be a woman of faith over comfort, over rationality, over practicality. And I think that she could do that exactly because of what Hebrews 11 says. Because Sarah chose to be a pilgrim. She had a light grip on her past. Hebrews tells us that Abraham was living for a heavenly city, and I think that the fact that Sarah was willing to leave all the permanence and steadiness and comfort and ease and follow her husband, who couldn't tell her exactly where he was going and exactly what that was looking like and exactly what they were doing and where they would be living, I think we could also say about Sarah that she was living for a heavenly city. And precious girls in the room, I think that's what we have to remember, that we look like we're following our husbands, but thankfully we're actually following God. And God doesn't have a call just on your husband's life. God doesn't have a will just for your husband's life. But your husband's call, your husband's will, is the call and the will for your life as well. And regardless of what you think it might be or might not be, it will be the best possible place and the best possible choice that you and I could ever make as wives.
So good. Amen. That was so true about Sarah. I mean, she's just trusting the Lord and not clinging to her past. And Abraham in this instance, you know, followed the Lord as well. You know, like my wife alluded to, Ur of the Chaldees back in the time of Abraham was an urban lifestyle. It was amazing. I mean, the archaeology, I'm kind of a history fan, and you get into the archaeology of the day, I mean, they had running water. And you're thinking about this is 2,000 years before Jesus. So they had running water. They had doctors that knew how to do heart surgery. This was a major metropolis that they lived in. Economy was booming at that time. And yet God comes to Abraham and says, I want you to move to a land, as she said, that I will show you. What land is that? I said, I will show you. Not I'm going to tell you before you get there. I just want you to go. And Abraham had to trust that, not just for himself. I mean, that, you know, you just put yourself in his sandals, guys. Like, you have a job, you have an effective, you know, way to earn income, and God's like, quit that. What am I going to do next? I'll tell you later. Oh, no. I need to provide for my family. You tell me now. Then I'll take that step of faith. Well, it wouldn't be faith then, would it? I want you to do, if God's calling you to, but not only do you have to trust God for himself, imagine he had to go home and have that conversation with his wife. We're going to move? Yeah, where are we moving? I don't know. Just get on the camel and we'll walk, and when God tells us to stop, we'll stop. And I think this is particularly amazing because most of you know, Sarai, her name, it means princess. Now just think that through with me. If your wife's nickname is princess, if that's her nickname, you're in trouble. Like, you're in trouble if everyone's like, oh, here comes the princess. You're in trouble as a man trying to take steps of faith and provide her enough stuff. This wasn't her nickname. This is what her mom and dad chose to name her. Oh, Abraham was in trouble. He's got to go home and tell Princess, we're going to leave, and God will tell me once we get there. And you've got to be men and women of faith to follow God like that. You have to be. I remember when God called us to leave North County, San Diego, which, is a pretty good place to live. Weather's pretty good. And we were part of a pretty good-sized church. And so, pastoring a youth group with like 200 kids in it. And the paycheck always came in. I wasn't wondering how I was going to get paid. And we weren't paid a lot, but at least it was consistent. And there was always things to do. I was coaching our golf team at the school. I was like, it doesn't get any better than this. And the pastor would ask me, do you want to go anywhere and plant a church? And I'm like, no. Who would ever want to leave this? Because I had seen guys that were my age go out, and 5 years later, they're still working at Home Depot, working and pastoring the church. And I'm like, no, thank you. This is my full-time job, and I love it. And then the pastor took us out to lunch again and said, do you want to go anywhere? My wife says, I love Texas. And I looked at her because I was like, you do? We'd been married for a few years at that time, and I was like, I didn't know you did. And in her defense, she meant Dallas, Texas.
I love Dallas.
Dallas, Texas. She didn't mean Paris, Texas, because Paris, Texas is different. We love, today, now that we were there for 7 years, love the people that are in that town. But our first day, we showed up. It was a 2-hour, we were going to Dallas because that's where her grandparents are from. And we were driving up to Paris, Texas, just to meet the people that wanted to pastor, just to pray it through, see what God was doing. And after the 2-hour drive, we both had to use the restroom. And so we pull into this burger place. And unlike out here where it's full and you can kind of sneak in the bathroom without buying anything, we were the only ones in the place. So I felt obligated to buy something to be able to use the restroom. No one made me, but I felt obligated. So we went and ordered a small drink. And as I'm ordering this small drink, the lady, she's picking her teeth with these nails.
No, she didn't have teeth. She was picking her gums.
Oh, okay, yes, picking her gums. And just listen to what we want. And then she gets the cup and she sees something in the bottom of the cup. She reaches in with her same nail, picks out whatever was on the bottom, and hands us the cup. And I'm like, we're not in Kansas anymore, sweetheart. We are not in California anymore. And that night we met the people, and they're like, we don't believe in children's ministry. And I was like, oh, okay, well, where are your kids going to go? Right on my lap. Okay, all right. And then their last question was, we don't believe in the Holy Spirit is for today. And I was like, oh, you mean the gifts of the Spirit. You've heard I'm a Calvary Chapel guy, so you're worried I'm mid-sermon, and I'm speaking in tongues, and you're worried that's going to happen. You don't know it doesn't actually happen like that, in our church services. And they're like, no. We don't believe the Holy Spirit is for today. And I was like, the third part of the Trinity, where'd he go? What do you mean he's not for today? And I was just like, we are never moving here. This is never going to happen. And then we went to their little facility, which was a third the size of this room for everything. And as I walked in the door, God told me, this is where I want you to move and go. And I'm the whole time doing their Thanksgiving Eve service just going, how am I going to tell my wife? And we get in the car and she goes, the Lord wants us to move here, doesn't he? And I said, he does. And we cried for the next 2 hours on the way back. I just mentioned that to you because sometimes I was told in Bible college, when you feel called to go somewhere, the city's going to illuminate. It's going to just, you're, oh, this is God's calling. Not always. Sometimes it's trusting God by faith where God wants you to go. And I realize not the vast majority of you are not going to be called to go start churches, but all of us are called to take steps of faith. We're called to take steps of faith in our lives, steps of faith in our marriages. Maybe some of you, step of faith is marriage. Getting married, is that going to be a good idea? It's a step of faith. And I would say, if God's calling you to do it, man, take that step of faith. Because here's what I know. Every time, and I was so afraid, just how will I provide? This was a group of about 10 people who didn't pay a pastor. The husbands rotated being the pastor. And so I'm coming with no job, just to see what God would do. And that scared me to death as a husband. How am I going to provide for my wife? We had a 2-year-old, and she was pregnant at the time with our second. Later we had a third, that's right. But anyways, I was scared to death. But I'm telling you what, God did such a work. I am so thankful for the things he taught me and showed me, and just watching God take this little group of people and turn it into this church. It was so fun. And the same thing with going to the desert. I didn't grow up in San Diego saying, I hope I live in Palm Springs someday. Like, I just love the weather out there. It's so much better than San Diego. Like, that was never a thing I uttered to God. And yet it was so clear that God was calling us here. And it's an amazing ministry that God is doing. In other words, he knows us. He knows us good. And every season of our life will be called to take steps of faith and just trust him. You know, for this last 2 years, it's been the weirdest season I've ever been through. My wife got sick, and what I mean by that is she's allergic to the atmosphere in the desert. Like, there's something about the Salton Sea and the way it affects the dust, and the dust blows constantly around there and it affects the sand, where I thought she was going to die. Like, she was getting hives and just couldn't breathe and doing all these things. And so we would take her to San Diego, you know, because that's where our family is from, and she'd get better. And then we go back and she'd kind of shrivel up. And so right now, we live in Oceanside, and I drive out to the church I pastor early Wednesday morning to do our staff meeting, and then you know, Wednesday night church, and then stay for Thursday to do work, and then come back, and then I go out as soon as this is over, because we have a Saturday night service and 3 Sunday morning services, and then I drive back again. And I'm telling you, when the Lord was like, this is what I want you to do in this season, it is not ideal to pastor a church from 2.5 hours away. That is not ideal. That's not how God normally calls you to do it. Trusting God isn't always easy. Trusting God isn't always fun in the moment. Trusting God with your kids isn't always easy. But I love what my wife said a few minutes ago. It's not that we just get to be the same always and trust God. Trusting God is where God continues to fill our life with that is good. Because he's good. Amen? And he wants us to take steps of faith to fill our lives with that which is good. You know, again, just one more thing on Abraham. The Ur of the Chaldees fell apart the generation after Abraham left. And you know who knew that? Not Abraham, not Sarah, not their urban lifestyle they were so excited about. God said, let me get you out of here, kid, because this place is falling apart. What I have for you is to be the father of many nations. And you know God loves you just like he loves Abraham. And when God asks you to trust him, it's because he loves you. It's not because he's trying to bring trials and heartache in your life. He's telling you to trust him with your marriage, and trust him with your family, and trust him with your kids, and trust him with your job, because the God we serve is good. Amen? Well, the next thing we see is that not only did they not cling to their past, but Sarah didn't cling to her person either.
Yeah, again, how Hebrews tells us what to hold fast to. And by choosing to hold fast to God, we're choosing automatically not to hold fast to what we would tend to hold fast to. And Sarah chose not to hold fast to her person. She didn't hold tightly to who she was. If you know their story, you remember that there were 2 times throughout their marriage that Abraham said, tell them you're my sister. And we know that Sarah ended up in the harem. And I don't know about you, but I think all the time, I really hope when we get to heaven that there's like heavenly movie night and we can just watch these things go down. Because I just want to see, like, what did Abraham do while she was being carried away into the harem by Abimelech? You know, was he just kind of like, oh, okay, I'm not going to look at her face? And what was Sarah's face like in those moments? And I just want to see how all of this happened. And we also know that she didn't focus on her outward adornment. And so she didn't take herself too seriously. She wasn't focused on her own safety. She wasn't focused on her own appearance. 1 Peter 3 says, wives, likewise, be submissive to your own husbands, that even if some do not obey the word, they without a word may be won by the conduct of their wives. When they observe your chaste conduct accompanied by fear, do not let your adornment be merely outward, arranging the hair, wearing gold, or putting on fine apparel. Rather, let it be the hidden person of the heart, with the incorruptible beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is very precious in the sight of God. For in this manner, in former times, the holy women who trusted in God also adorned themselves, being submissive to their own husbands, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, whose daughters you are if you do good and are not afraid with any terror. And I know that today in our world, the word submission often gets a bad rap. And, maybe some of you are surprised I'm even saying it. You're thinking, isn't that an S word? Or I don't know. But, it's really not a bad thing. And what's so interesting to me, how the enemy is just so crafty and so tricky, is that we accept the idea of submission in every other area of life. If you go to work, you have different rankings at work. We expect our military to have different rankings. We expect the teachers to be in charge at schools and the students to learn and the other people to help. Every other form of this world has the idea of ranking, not based on qualifications, not based on you're better than you, but based on the idea of order. Based on the idea of letting everything work out well. The world without submission is anarchy. And a marriage without submission is anarchy. And God doesn't look at the husbands, and I think you're probably going to talk about this a little bit. God doesn't look at the husbands and say, you're a male, and so you're automatically more qualified. You're a woman, and you don't mean anything, so get in this position. But God, with his sovereignty, with his goodness, he looks at a marriage, and this is how he set it up. And again, he knows what's best, not for our happiness, but for our holiness. He knows what will get us to call out to him, to cry out to him. And so he set up the order of submission, not women to say that you're less qualified or should be a doormat, because your definition of submission should definitely be a godly and biblical definition of what submission truly is. And we learn what it is from the life of Sarah. And Sarah didn't hang on to who she was too tightly. She hung on to who God was. And because of that, she's held up in 1 Peter. She's held up in Hebrews 11. And she's called beautiful by God. It was her submission that made her beautiful. It was her quiet heart, her acceptance that made her beautiful. And I know Jason's going to get into the fact that her outward beauty was also present, but even outward beauty fades. And outward beauty is nothing compared to what the beauty that God can bring from the inside of our heart. She didn't cling to what she wanted for herself. She valued respect for her husband over her own personal comfort and ease. She valued her inward beauty of her heart above the beauty that came from comfort. But more than that, when you and I are submitting to our husbands in the same way that we're following our husbands, when we're submitting to them, we don't have to think of their worth. Are they worthy of my submission? Do they deserve my submission? Because you and I are not actually submitting to our husbands. We're submitting to God. We're submitting to God's plans, to God's ways, to God's sovereignty to be able to take care of us. See, Sarah, I don't think, would have gone into the harem knowing that, Abraham, it's up to you to come and rescue me. And if you don't, I'm in this harem forever. I think that Sarah could go into that harem knowing that she belonged to God, that she didn't belong to Abraham. She wasn't his to drag around. But that she was a princess, but she was a princess of the King of Kings. And when you and I speak our minds and have our wills and have our choices, but then, like Shelley so beautifully said, leave it ultimately up to your husbands, what you're actually doing is leaving it ultimately up to God, because you belong to him. And Sarah could trust her husband because she trusted God more. She trusted God more than she trusted Abraham. She trusted in God more than she trusted in her marriage. And that's really what submission comes down to. Submission is us choosing to let God intervene, to let God handle it. I don't know if you have more than one kid, but no matter how sweet your kids are, they end up arguing. And I just always remember saying, my firstborn, she just thought that she ruled the house with me. Like, she came out of the womb thinking that her name was co-mom. And it would never cease to amaze me how I would be on my way into a room to correct my son, who so nicely talked to Pastor David, to correct my son for the way he was talking to my daughter, and yet she would start yelling at him, and then I had to correct them both. All submission is us stepping back and letting God handle it. And that's what it is, because you belong to God, and he will step in. And he will handle it. And I have to say, I have the easiest husband to follow, other than the fact that he's so fast. He's kind of like hanging onto a kite. And yeah, now that he said our kind of wild story of me sitting in Oceanside and unable, I get this anaphylactic reaction to the desert. So I don't know if I've let go of your kite strings. I'm like, you're on your own. I don't know what I'm doing. But no matter how great your husband is or how difficult he is, it ultimately boils down to the fact that you're choosing to trust that you belong to God, who Isaiah says is our maker, is our husband. He will take care of us. And it's God's ability that Sarah was trusting in. She wasn't holding fast to her person. She wasn't holding fast to her rights. She wasn't even holding fast to her hurt, because I don't know, I've never been tossed into a harem, but I would imagine that there's a little bit of like hurt that comes over that moment. She wasn't holding fast to that. She was holding fast to God's ability. And girls, I think we can be encouraged by their story, because if God could move Abraham from comfort and ease and idolatry and lying and trickery, then I think that God can move our husbands to where he wants them to be as well. And I trust my husband, and I'm blessed by him, and he's easy to submit to. But even in a good marriage, I still don't trust him anywhere near as much as I trust God's ability to watch out for me, to watch over for me, to care for me. And obedience, like with Sarah, it's what makes us beautiful. That was her beauty. The beauty of a woman who could choose God, choose faith, choose to trust that God would take care of her.
Amen. You know, where Sarah, as we know, as my wife just described, you know, she wouldn't cling to her person. She went along with all these crazy things. But I think this is really where we see Abraham drop the ball, because he is not trusting God with his life and his wife's life. I mean, he's the one that, as she said, and you know, twice in their marriage, they're heading to a town, and he's like, hey, I need you to lie and tell the ruler of this place that you're my sister, not my wife. And when we look at that, we're like, what in the world is going on? I mean, especially for you that are Bible students, you kind of know the chronology of things. When Sarah heads down to Egypt with Abraham, she's 65 years old. And I remember the first time I ran into that, I was like, no disrespect to anyone who's 65 or older, but I'm just imagining Pharaoh is the king of the world at that time. He can have any girl he wants. Why is Abraham worried about his 65-year-old wife? Like, why would he pick her over the thousands of ladies he had access to in Egypt, right? Well, there's a couple things you need to know that I'm telling you. Your Bible is always telling you the true story. The first thing is we have learned historically that those in Egypt, they loved the look of Semitic women. You know, the Hebrews were descendants of Shem, and the Egyptians were descendants of Ham. So those that came from Ham, they loved how Semitic women looked. And it was well known in Egypt that they would not commit adultery. That sounds crazy. What they would do is kill your husband so that they could have you as wife. They're not into adultery, but murder is A-okay. And that was well known back then. So Abraham's like, they'll kill me to get to you. And, well, she's still 65. Well, they lived a lot longer back then. And so if you put it in our time frame, 65 is the new 30. So it's 30. And then beyond that, when they were discovering the Dead Sea Scrolls, which again are one of the greatest archaeological discoveries of all time and did so much to prove the validity of the Word of God, in the scrolls, they found a physical description of Sarah not included in the Bible. And you know, it's written, we don't know how can you trust it or not, but this writing in there said that of the day, she was the most beautiful woman on earth at that time. So when you think 30, think supermodel 30. Now you understand Abraham's consistent, him being a little scared. I've got a 30-year-old supermodel wife who all the men down here think are pretty. They're going to kill me to get to her. Hey, babe, tell him you're my sister. And then she does, and she gets taken into the harem. And what this shows me is that Abraham is concerned more with his life and his feelings than he is about his wife's life and his wife's feelings. And men, if I can just speak to you for a minute, this is something all of us have to battle. I mean, men and women have to battle it. Selfishness is a real thing. I mean, I think without selfishness, there would be no issues in marriage, would there be? Because we like, I just want to do what's best for you. I just want to do what's best for you. Oh, that would work so well. But instead, it's like, I care about me and what I want and what I think is best. And we spend very little time putting ourselves in the other's shoes. What's going on with you? You know, I dropped the ball huge in our marriage in our first few years in Paris, Texas. Because for the first time, you know, seeing a church grow, I wasn't just the assistant pastor that, hey, thanks for having a good church size so I can have 200 kids in the youth ministry. It was, I thought, up to me. It's up to me to you know, preach good sermons and meet with people as much as I can, because I've got to grow this church, because with church growth comes provision for me and my family. And so I jumped in with both feet and my head and both my hands. And I was spending 60, 70 hours a week at the church working, doing things. I was the only staff member. So I was cleaning, I was organizing children's ministry, I would do worship, put the guitar down, grab the mic and teach and just all that stuff. And I just left her with a brand new baby boy and a 2-year-old daughter. And in my mind, it was kind of like team sports, like we're on a team. And my job is to pastor this church. Your job is to raise the family. You do your job, I'll do my job. Woo, we're going to win. Not thinking at all, what does it feel like to be her? What is she experiencing? I've got my mission. I'm going to get it done. And I think this is a struggle for a lot of marriages. We get selfish and we're not thinking about the other person. You know, I was a very helpful husband, always been, a very faithful husband, and I would provide for my family. So I thought I was a great husband. We kind of learn how to relate to women. This is going to sound awkward and weird, but it's true. You learn to relate to women by the first woman you ever know, right, guys? You know your mom. And so you kind of study, you know, you're not trying to love her in a weird romantic way, obviously. But you know what makes her happy, what makes her sad. You kind of learn, and most of us go into marriages think, well, okay, I've kind of figured it out. Do this, don't do this, because the first woman I knew, my mom, she didn't like this, she did like that. Well, my mom, being single for most of our, you know, my growing up, a single mom, she loved it when I helped. So I would come home and clean the house, or I would come home and help start dinner, even though I was, 7 years old. She would come home from work and just like, I love you, thanks for the help. And I'm like, that's how to get to a woman's heart. So when I got married, I just like, hey, let me help you. And as soon as I got home from work, I'll change the kids' diapers. I'll give you a day. You can go to a coffee shop. And when my day off, I'll take the kids, which meant I would, put Cheerios on their high chairs so they would get stuck there and they'd have a hard night. I'd sleep right next to them. But anyways, I was watching the kids and taking care of them. And I thought I was the greatest husband in the world. And I was floored when she said to me one time, I love you. I'm never going to leave you, but I don't feel like we're even friends. And my honest reaction back then was, why is that even important? I think I was smart enough not to say that, but that's what I was thinking.
Your eyes said it.
My eyes said it? Okay, that's good. I'm sure they did. Because growing up, my mom didn't have a lot of friends, and we would eat dinner in separate bedrooms. We're all a product of our environment. Like Pastor Manny, my dad left when I was 5, and he was a drug addict and alcoholic in and out of prison most of my young life. And then the stepfathers were all abusers, and they weren't good men either. And so I just kind of learned how to by myself. And the Lord was teaching me how to be a good man. And so I brought this into our marriage, and I thought I was super helpful. And compared to some Texas husbands, I thought I was doing a great job. I said, how many diapers do you change? I've never changed a diaper in my life. What kind of wimpy California man are you? Like I would be told that on like men's retreats. And I would leave that going, my wife is so blessed. She is so blessed. But it would be months that we wouldn't go on a date. It'd be months before I would sit down and be like, how are you doing? Because that wasn't natural to me. It wasn't the way I was raised. And when she said, I don't even feel like you're my friend, my honest heart was like, is that even important? Like, you got a job, I got a job, we're making Jesus proud together. What's wrong with that? It was I went to a Christian bookstore back when those things used to exist. And I know, right there, I see one. But outside of churches, it's hard to find them anymore, like Lifeway, all those things that used to be. Well, I found one, and I found that book, The 5 Love Languages. And I'd always heard about it, but I kind of thought it was like psychobabble. So I was like, staunch in I'm a Calvary Chapel pastor. I don't need to read that. What a loser. So I finally read it, and I'm like, oh, people interpret love differently? My mom, obviously, her love language was acts of service. So when I would do acts of service, she would feel so loved. My wife was like, thanks for changing the diaper. That's sweet, but her love language is quality time. And that was the worst on the list for me. That was any of my friends. They're like, yeah, he calls me once a year sometimes. That's who I am. And I realized I was failing. I was failing. And God put on my heart, hey, listen, Abraham didn't care how his wife really felt. He didn't care what she was going through. He just had a mission he was going to accomplish. And that flows right out of the curse, doesn't it, from Genesis? Adam and Eve fall, and God goes to curse them. And to Eve, you remember, he said, your desire will be for your husband. And some people interpret that to mean that she wants her husband's position. And maybe that's true for some marriages. Maybe. I want to be the boss. I want to lead. I want to be in charge. I personally think it just means what it means. Eve wanted to be with Adam. You say, why is that a curse? Because Adam's curse is his desire will be for his field. You ever notice that? He's got to get out there and take care of the thorns and till the ground, and I've got to produce a good field. And she's like, I just want to be with you. And there's 90% of marriage counseling right there. I just want him to see me. I just want him to hear me. I just want him to know I exist. He never's home, or if it's not work, it's whatever is his field. Whether it's entertainment, whether it's an activity, going out and shooting baskets or whatever it is, racing cars. It's like, I've got a field that I want to be the best in, and she wants to be with you. And one of the greatest keys for marriages, at least it's been in mine, is to stop for a second and say, what's going on in our life right now, how does the other person feel? What is the other person experiencing? It didn't take me as long with our current situation as it did when we were in Texas. It took me almost 7 years to figure it out in Texas. But now, I look at me and I'm like, I don't like driving 2.5 hours a week, and this is really inconvenient, but I'm doing what God's calling me to do. And it took me a while to say, what does it feel like to be her, who has spent the first 22.5 years of our marriage sitting in the front row of church with her husband, running a super successful women's ministry, and now she sits at home and watches me on a computer screen, or follows my worship leader's son around wherever he's leading worship and sits in church that way. And it took me a while to just say, hey, wait. What do you talk about at all these marriage conferences? What is she walking through? What is she going through? And the minute that gear began to switch in my own heart, man, things get so much better. So much better for your marriage. What is he going through? What is he feeling? What is he experiencing? What's it like for him to be enduring this season we're in? What is it like for her to be enduring this season that we're in? Marriage works so good when I'm not just concerned about my needs, my want, what I desire. Marriage works so great when I say, God, what are you trying to show me about what she's walking through so I can love her the way Christ loves the church? We all know God has given each of us one rule, right? And I just love that about the Lord. Because talk about bookstores. You get into those on Amazon today. How many thousands of books are there on marriage? There are so many, and they're thick. And that's intimidating for us guys. I know some guys are readers, but most of us are like, is there a movie? Is there like a podcast I can listen to instead? Like I'm going to read? Like, okay. And some of you women are like, I love marriage books. But anyways, that's stereotypical. But the reality is it's true in most marriages. But those books, I mean, and you're like, I don't know, I can't remember. Am I from Venus or Mars? Am I spaghetti or am I a waffle? That I kind of know. That I kind of remember. I'm like, here's my little box. I'm a man. My wife is like, it's all connected. You know? So I understand that picture. I get that. Everything affects one another.
All right, we're going to close in prayer
Okay.
now.
But the reality is, I love the Lord. He goes, can you remember one thing? I'm like, I can, even as a guy, I can remember one thing, Lord. Are you loving your wife like Jesus loves the church? And you know that means something different for you and your wife than it does for me and my wife. Because her love language is different. It's probably different than your mom's. Praise the Lord. Never want to be married to your mom. But Peter says to dwell with your wife with knowledge. To know who she is. To know how she works. And often when we're in our moments of trouble, like the Lord will just say, are you doing that? And the answer is always no. No, I'm not loving her like you do in this situation. And for a few precious gals, your rule, are you, as Christy, well taught on, am I submitting or respecting my husband? Am I thinking about what he's going through and what he's facing? Or am I just concerned about me and my wants and desires? And we can step off the me stool and say, God, how can I love this other person the way that you do? And marriage has such a chance to thrive. So Abraham dropped the ball, but then we come to the last one. And the last one there is both of them. They didn't cling to their promise. And so, Christy, why don't you talk about that when it comes to Sarah?
This one, it's hard, and we'll wrap it up with this. I didn't want to end on a bad note with Sarah. I think she's so amazing. But I think that she would also want her life and her mistakes to be a warning, like we so often do. We know what we mess up in, and we want to share that with our kids so that hopefully they can have a little bit of a different ending or middle or whatever it might be. And so Sarah did forget in one moment to hold fast to God alone. And for a minute, she held fast to the promise. And it was in that moment, I'm sure you know their life, but the Hagar scandal was born. And Sarah says to Abraham, well, if you're so sure that God's going to give you a kid, then why don't you take Hagar and sleep with her and have a kid with her? And, I feel like sometimes her heart is maybe a little bit different than is portrayed. You hear all these different things like, well, she was sure that Abraham was the problem and she was trying to show he wasn't, or she wasn't, or, whatever it might have been. But I also feel like we see so much of Sarah's life, that she did respect him, that she was a submissive wife, that she wasn't, like in the harem, she wasn't choosing situation by situation. Well, do I want to submit here? No, I'm not going to submit here. She was just overall a loving, respectful wife. And she wanted the world for him. She had already followed him to the ends of the earth, and she maybe didn't have the promise. Everywhere in the Bible we see God comes to Abraham and gives him the promise of Isaac, the promise of nations, the promise of multitudes, but it never says that Sarah was there. And so I just wonder if the only way she knew that this promise that God had spoken, that God was working, that there was hope, that God was doing something, was because Abraham talked about it constantly. And maybe she felt like she was standing in the way of making all of his dreams come true. And maybe she felt like she was hindering God's promise from being provided. And so maybe it was with a heart of love, a heart of wanting to have Abraham's promise fulfilled, that she says to Abraham, well, I can't make it happen, but maybe if you take Hagar and maybe we can make it happen like this. But I think what we need to learn from Sarah, because I'm assuming not all of us have Hagars waiting in the wings for us to hand to our husbands. Like, that's not my goal. It's not my goal. And
Noted.
noted. Thank you. And so, but I think that all of us recognize that the husbands we love, the husbands we serve, the husbands we respect, that they have things that they want to be fulfilled in their lives. Whether it's callings, whether it's visions, whether it's promises, whether it's words that were spoken to them or dreams that they had before they were married to us. I think that they all have things that we could look at and say, I want to help with that, but I seem to be hindering with that. And I think what we need to learn from Sarah's life is that, precious wives, we are off the hook of being their dream providers. That we can love them, that we can respect them, but we cannot be God to them. We would love to give them the world, but the world is not ours to give. It's not ours to give. It's not our promise to fulfill in their life. And God wants to develop the character in our husbands that he wants there. And I think for some of us, we would love nothing more than to rescue our husbands from every situation that would give them character. You know, sometimes he'll come home and he'll tell me that something that somebody in the church said, and I'm like, that's so mean. I don't know, I'm kind of thinking like, I'm the only one who's okay to say mean things to you. Our words look really mean when they come out of other people's mouths, I think. But, you know, we have to let God develop the character. We have to let God do it in his timing. And, you know, Sarah was trying to be a giver of the world, but that's God's job. Sarah was trying to be a fulfiller of the dreams, but that's God's job. God is the promise giver, and God's the promise keeper. And it's by faith that we trust God as he develops the depth in our husbands. And we can't cut short the character that God is trying to develop within them. And so Sarah, I think in that one moment, she forgot to hold fast to God as a promise keeper, and she tried to be that. But that's the only thing bad I can say about her. She was a great girl.
She was. And, you know, I think she had a huge effect on who Abraham was, because from Abraham's valley, we all are also aware of his mountaintop experience. When he finally has the promised son, he has Isaac. And then God, which seems so out of character until you really get into the background of the story, and we don't have time to get into that right now, but God says, I want you to take your son, your only son, and offer him as a sacrifice to me, as a burnt sacrifice. And Abraham, having plenty of burnt sacrifices with animals, he knew exactly the horror that God was asking him to do with his son. And yet he walks up to that mountain to do exactly that. And I think what had happened is Abraham had grown up. Early on in his life, he wasn't trusting God. Like, you gotta lie, you gotta save my sister, because you'll probably be in a harem, but at least I'll be alive. Whoopee! You know, he had grown from the point of doing that to saying, God, I'm going to trust you with this promise. And here's what I think he was at. Well, that's what Hebrews says. That Abraham was convinced that God could resurrect Isaac, and would resurrect Isaac before he would ever not keep his word. Now, we know God stayed his hand and God doesn't want human sacrifice. But Abraham had so grown to trust God with every bit of his life, he becomes the father of the faithful. And obviously, it had a lot to do with his relationship with God, but let's not discount this in a marriage study. I think who Abraham became to be had a lot to do with his wife. You know, my wife talked about earlier the structure that God sets up in marriages, and the husband's to be the head and the leader, and as a wife, you're supposed to submit and to follow. And I hope every one of you know it's not a spirituality contest. I'm not the head of this relationship because I'm more spiritual than her. I don't want to get in a spirituality contest with Christy Duff. I would lose. The pastor of the church, I would lose. And watching her trust God in the early days of our marriage, trusting God in the middle of our marriage, trusting God now in just this weird, funky season we're in, she says, you need to seek God and do what God wants you to do. And I know some of you precious gals, you think, if I told my husband that, he'd be like, good, shut your mouth, let me lead. If that's really your heart, guys, you need to be here today. And like any time the subject's on marriage, like show up. The reality is for most of us guys, we put on a hard face because we're guys, we're supposed to, but it scares me to death that I know God is holding me responsible to lead my family. That scares the living daylights out of me. And that I have a wife, and especially back then, 3 small children saying, where are you leading us, spiritual leader? And it scared me so much, I would get on my face and say, God, I need to make the right decision. I need to grow. I need to become the man you're calling me to be. And God grew me up, certainly, by my relationship with him. But I really believe I'm the man I am today because of her. Because she didn't block the lessons God was trying to teach me through having to depend on him. And while she depended on him and not just on me and what I'm doing, it grew me up. And Abraham gets to this point where he's like, God's either going to raise him from the dead or I don't know, but God's going to keep his word. That I know to be true because he had walked through the hills and valleys and he knew that about God. And this is what we want in our relationships, right? We want our spouse to become everything that God wants them to become. We want them to experience everything God wants them to be experienced. Well, obviously, we need to pray for them. We got to point their eyes to Jesus. You as men, we're going to church. We're going to be in the presence of God. We're going to worship. I know I've worked hard and I'm tired, but we're going to get there because I know it's good for my family, but it's also doing the one thing God asked me to do. Is I love her like Jesus loves her in a sacrificial manner because that's how God loves us. I let her become everything God wants her to become. And she needs that, and our kids need that, and our friends need that. And as she submits to me and respects me, it scares me to death. So I have to become everything that God wants me to become. And this role of marriage, it's certainly been a great picture, as Pastor David said, of just of heaven and Jesus and all those great things. But it is also the very tool that God uses to make you into the man or woman God is calling you to be. You know, it's a way too often said cliche, but God has you get married, and the number one goal isn't necessarily happiness. And we think it is. We think it is. Why are you getting married? And we have 2 different definitions as guys and girls before we get married of what happiness is, don't we? Let's just be honest. Guys are like, yeah, you know why? Happy. And girls are like, we're going to take walks on the beach, and he's going to write poetry to me, and we're going to be so happy. And you get together, and hopefully it's happening, but it's like, woo. And as has been said already today, if I will do marriage God's way, it can be a super happy experience. But I think God's primary goal is to develop holiness in you. As we die to ourselves, as we submit to the one thing God told us to do, and let him shape us into the men and women we desperately need to be. And let God shape our spouse, our partner, into who they are supposed to be. God loves you so much and wants to take you, no matter who you are or what you do, and use your life to change your sphere of influence around you. And he'll certainly use your relationship with Jesus. But he also wants to use your relationship with your spouse. And so instead of letting it be a nightmare, let it be a blessing by saying, God, I want to do this your way. I want to think about what that other person feels and thinks and experiences. And I want to either love them like Jesus does or respect them like I'm supposed to respect you as the leader of the church, as the leader of my life. I want to do the one thing you've called me to do in this marriage, to let us become everything that God wants us to be.